This video has been made with the purpose of education and awareness of real crimes, and there is no disrespect intended to anyone. This is to help promote truth and justice for anyone who has been a victim of crime. What I'm about to report is what I have researched online, and I will welcome any corrections should they be required. Hi there, little berry true crime fans, Eri Berry here. Great to have you back for another video. This one is, I have to confess, there isn't a lot of information out there on the internet about this, and I can't put really that many images, or any images really, of the individual involved here, because quite a lot of the images and footage online is copyrighted, so I can't use it. But I will put a link to a video by AP Archive in the description below. It gives more of a background on this case. We're going to be talking today about someone who adopted the moniker of Dr. Death. Now, when people say Dr. Death, most of the time they think of Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman was a serial killer who lived in the north of England, and he abused his position as a doctor to take the lives of his patients. He was evil, beyond evil. He was given the nickname Dr. Death, but Harold Shipman isn't the only medical doctor who has abused their position or has downright used their position to do very nefarious, damaging things. And I will give trigger warnings that this does involve child murder. It also touches on subjects of racism and alluding to the Nazis and the Holocaust. Now, if those are triggering for you, please don't watch any further if that is. I completely understand why, but I'm going to get quite triggered during this video because it makes me so fucking angry as to not... It's a bit like with Anu Singh. What happened was disgusting. Was there any justice? Was there fuck? The person I'm going to talk about today is Richard Gladwell McGown, and I'm going to just refer to him as McGown. I'm not even going to call him doctor because he has been struck off. He was born in India in 1937 to British parents, and he did actually end up moving to the UK. He lived in Scotland specifically. He lived mostly in Glasgow, but he studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh, where he obtained his medical degree. After graduating from the University of Edinburgh, he travelled a bit. He did some work in Zambia and in Sweden. But eventually in the 1960s, he moved to Zimbabwe. He settled down there. He became a consultant anaesthetist. He worked at two particular hospitals, and I have to refer to my notes here because I can't pronounce this one, and I do apologise if I am butchering any of these pronunciations, but I think it's pronounced Parirenyatwa Hospital in Zimbabwe. I do apologise. And the Avenues Clinic, and they are based in Harare, which is the Zimbabwean capital. McGowan actually ended up obtaining his Zimbabwe citizenship, so he had dual citizenship between the UK and Zimbabwe. He made a life for himself there. However, during the 1980s, McGowan made some decisions which cost innocent people their lives. There are bloody good reasons why the medical industry worldwide is governed by many different bodies, and some of them are specific to certain countries and certain jurisdictions. It depends on what medicine they're practicing. Drugs and all kinds of things go through these clinical trials for a good reason, because it can cost lives. It's also about consent and autonomy. People have to know what they're getting themselves into. McGowan was an anaesthetist, so he was trained to administer anaesthetics and painkillers. And when you administer anaesthetics and painkillers, it has to be done very precisely. My sister-in-law is a nurse, and she actually said to me once that the anaesthetist is the one really that has your life in their hands, because if they give you too much based on your weight, body type, that can cause a huge amount of problem, or if they don't give you enough. Any violation of these rules or any negligence, I mean, human error can happen, but when we're talking about people who deliberately cut corners to make apparently their lives easier, or to save time, or sometimes deliberately just, to cause harm, this is exactly why these regulations are in place, and this is why so many checks and things take place all the time. Suspicions were raised after there were a number of unexplained deaths involving surgeries at which McGown was the consultant anaesthetist. A 10-year-old girl called Lavender Kaminwa was admitted with appendicitis. I believe she was treated at the Avenue Clinic. After having her appendectomy, she was released into the care of her parents, but she later inexplicably passed away. A 2-year-old boy called Kalpesh Nagindas, I'm so sorry again if I'm mispronouncing that, or Nagindas, I do apologise. He was admitted to the Avenue Clinic in July 1988. He was going for a circumcision because he had some problems urinating. This should have been a routine procedure, no problem. But when Kalpesh had his operation, literally within an hour and 15 minutes of him having this operation, McGown personally handed the boy to his father and said, quote, "Here is your child, I've brought him back from the dead." What doctor says that? Also, he went home just over an hour after his surgery. They need to be kept for observation for longer than that. This little boy, when they got him home, to use his father's words, the boy appeared to fall into a deep sleep, so he fell unconscious. But while he was unconscious, he started to vomit yellow fluid, most likely bile. He was admitted back into the hospital and he died 6 hours later. 3 other people passed away inexplicably for apparently no good reason after they had had surgeries in which McGown was the consultant anaesthetist. I need to refer to my notes for the people. I'm so sorry again if I'm mispronouncing anybody's name, but there was 4-year-old Tsitsi Chidodo and Irene Papatheocarus. I couldn't find an age for her, unfortunately. And there was a 62-year-old lady called Rose Pinke Asazua. Like with Harold Shipman, many other medical professionals started to voice concern about the number of deaths. It's so awful that it has to be a certain number of people have to die before they realise there's too many people that are dying. Of course, coincidences happen. But the nurses blew the whistle so many times saying this is not right. I mean, it does seem extremely far-fetched. There's so many doctors out there who don't do anything deliberately wrong. But there are doctors, not just Shipman and not just McGown, who have deliberately harmed their patients and abused their position. It took a long time for anyone to listen to these nurses. Also, McGown had written to medical journals, he'd given talks in many other countries, presented papers about new methods and new anaesthetic drugs. These were specifically epidural anesthesia, so basically an injection in the back like a woman would receive during labour, for example, to numb the pain from that point of the spine downwards. However, in 1993, a parliamentary report was made to the Zimbabwean government which alleged that McGowan had been experimenting on his patients with either excessive or different, untried, untested, unauthorized methods and cocktails, I suppose, of morphine and anesthesia. The allegations were for negligence, gross incompetence, and disgraceful conduct. Approximately 500 patients were thought to have been personally targeted by McGowan, who had injected them with either too much of a drug or the wrong type of drug. These drugs were supposed to relieve post-operative pain. But sometimes too much of a painkiller can kill. I'm not sure out of this 500 who had actually died or whether they had been severely injured or just suspected. But what is known is that McGowan knowingly did this to his patients without their knowledge, without their consent, and quite a lot of them were underage. and a huge significant portion of them were black. There was outrage in Zimbabwe, and quite rightly too. A doctor had been killing these kids, and his actions had been likened to what the Nazis did to the Jews in the war. Now, I'm going to go on a tangent here, okay? I have to say this, right? You know, I'm white, obviously, but when I was growing up, I wasn't even exposed to racism. Nobody ever, you know, wherever I live, where I went to school, was ever labelled or given a description or segregated or described in terms of their skin colour. Granted, the place I lived in was predominantly white, but there were many people from many countries I met. We played host to students from Japan, Thailand, Taiwan, Russia, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Mexico, Portugal. There were so many people that I met and I was introduced to. Nobody was ever labelled or described as being the tone of their skin or where they were from. We raise money at school all the time for children in Ethiopia, Somalia, and war-torn countries. We never ever called them Ethiopians, Somalians. Never. I wasn't ever exposed to the N-word. I was never exposed to even calling people black or white. There was never any of that. We referred to the people we were helping as people, and the children particularly, because we were kids, we were told they were our brothers and our sisters. I absolutely detest that we as an evolved species can hate people simply because they're not the same as who we are. Who you're born as, the genes you have is not your fault. And even if it were, so fucking what? You're human. Everyone's human. And just because somebody has a different skin tone does not mean they're a bad person. Just because somebody is born in another country doesn't mean that they are less than. A human being is a human being is a human being. I am fucking sick of the fact that we are so advanced and yet we still have this mentality that if someone isn't one of us, they need to be exterminated or they need to be somehow changed. You know, how the Nazis did experiments with these poor people to try and change them, just so they look different. I mean, what's important, somebody's looks or who somebody is? I'm going to get really angry if I carry on. These 5 particular people that I've highlighted were the only 5 names that were brought to Parliament as those who were really seriously suspected of being killed by this so-called doctor. Parliament were outraged. The nurses were the first to blow the whistle. They were the first to talk to the press. They alleged racism. They alleged that this doctor had experimented on black people. He'd used his position as an anaesthetist for his own research and administered these drugs to these non-consenting, underage, vulnerable people just so he could know what the effects of these drugs are, just for his own gain, or he just wanted to have control over people's lives and he didn't care who it was. There were many students, particularly, who protested this. McGown admitted to injecting the children with morphine because he felt that this drug, because it worked on adults, yeah, it should be fine on kids. I'm sorry, kids and adults' bodies are very different. Adults have stopped developing and stopped growing. Children's bodies are developing and they're a lot more fragile. That is exactly why when you look at painkiller packaging, it says quite a lot of the time, do not give to any people under the age of 12. Because it's to do with weight and it's to do with the development of your organs not being able to deal with high levels or even sometimes any level of a certain drug that is fit for an adult. That is another reason why baby formulas and baby foods have to be almost zero salt, because even just having one little bit of a, adult food can be harmful to a baby. Most of the time it was overdoses of morphine that killed them. So McGown was arrested And he wasn't charged with murder, no. He was charged with culpable homicide. Kind of the equivalent of manslaughter. No different to murder in my book. He was charged with the murder of Lavender and Kalpesh, and also the other three that I mentioned, but those, I believe it was those three, he was never convicted of the murder of those three, but he was convicted of the culpable homicide of Lavender and Kalpesh. He was charged, but later the charges were dropped on the experimenting with black patients. That caused a huge amount of anger in Zimbabwe, and quite rightly too. After the Second World War and the world went on the hunt for these Nazis, even just guards, not just the doctors that did all these horrible experiments, they were put to death. They were put on trial for the whole world to see that this evil would not be tolerated. And yet this doctor, he only has 2 charges for culpable homicide. He is convicted. Now, if you think the sentence that Anu Singh received when she killed Jo Jinkway on that video I did a few months back was lenient, get this. McGown was found guilty of culpable homicide on 2 occasions. He was sentenced to 12 months, so a year, in prison, only to serve a 6-month at a minimum, with the other 6 a suspended sentence. He was also required to pay $1,250 to the families. What the actual fuck? That's the kind of sentence you would get for theft or shoplifting. This was not a mistake. This was not human error. This wasn't just negligence. He deliberately killed these kids. He deliberately overdosed many more patients. He was described by many people as a racist and a Nazi, and he really deserved a much heavier sentence. He should have been charged and convicted of murder. During court, his conduct was really disrespectful. He was eating sweets. He was singing to himself. He was laughing. He was just sort of like, fidgeting, and he was just, it was almost like he was a spectator. He didn't appear to be a man on trial. And the judge, Paddington Garvey, he actually had to reprimand him a few times and tell him to be respectful in court. This was a case involving dead people, dead children. I don't care whether he was de facto innocent or not, you don't behave like that when human life is concerned. Kalpesh's father described this as a mockery of justice, and I am very much inclined to agree. After McGown served his sentence, he did actually appeal his sentence. I mean, why? It was just a very small sentence. I was, when I was reading this, I was hoping it would be a bit like what happened with Junko Furuta, where the murderers appealed their sentences only to get harsher sentences. I hoped this would happen, but no. His appeal was not successful. He served out his sentence, and he came back to Scotland, didn't he? And as far as I'm aware, still lives in Scotland. These crimes took place between 1986 and 1992, because it was in 1993 that the first charges were brought, and he was sentenced in 1995. He was so audacious and so arrogant, seriously. When he returned to the UK, he still was able to practice in the UK, he still had that. He appealed to a court in London to try and keep his license. Big mistake. Well, actually, it wasn't a big mistake because it was good what happened. From that appeal, his license to practice medicine was revoked indefinitely, and not just in the UK. He can never practice medicine again, ever, in the whole world. He was struck off. That doesn't mean that he can't ever harm anybody. Someone who does that in their position as a doctor, imagine what they could do when they're not in that position as a doctor. Yes, they won't have the same kind of access to the same drugs, but they're still dangerous. This man needed to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Potentially 500 people, or even more. were experimented on and abused and killed by this so-called doctor. Why do we have to kill each other? Why do we have to treat each other like this just because of our own personal opinion on, well, that person's not like me, therefore they're less and therefore they don't deserve to live? What happened to live and let live? How about we just don't kill each other? How about we just don't hurt each other? How about we just do things that make us happy as long as they don't harm anyone else? What's wrong with that? I've seen some awful footage and documentaries and news stories of what happened at the Holocaust, and I made myself watch some of the really bad ones, the footage of when the concentration camps were liberated, people were found, and the soldiers were comforting the last of the victims. And there was footage of when some of the people their bodies were exhumed so that they could be examined to determine exactly what happened to them. I made myself watch it because it's important to know that this happened, and it's important to know that this is the kind of thing that people do. When will we start loving each other? When will people like this so-called Dr. McGowan ever stop? When will we live in a world where we're safe? Because we deserve to be here. The animals deserve to be here. Everything that's alive deserves to be here. And it's not just you that deserves to be here. Everyone else deserves to be here and have autonomy and liberation, and not have things done to them without their consent, not to have their lives taken. There are people who not only abuse their position, but they use their position. They get into a certain profession because it gives them access to things that they want. Their choice of career enables them to carry out and get involved in deplorable, depraved, and sickening and evil acts. You know what I'm talking about. Even if you don't want to be kind to somebody, just don't do any harm. Why? I think this is the most animated I've ever been in a video, apart from, I think, the one about Joe Chinquay and a few others as well. I was pretty animated about Don Steenkamp and that he will get out of prison in 2.5 years, most likely. If there's anything I despise as much as crimes, it's when crimes go unpunished like this one. I am so sorry to the families of those poor people who were murdered by this man, whose lives were irrevocably affected and changed. I'll leave you with this thought. Everybody eats, everybody drinks, everybody pees, everybody poos, everybody dies, everybody fucks, everybody lives and breathes. We're all the same. Treat everybody the same, because there's no difference between you, me, anyone else. Biologically speaking, we're all the same. And if you think somebody is less than because of their skin colour, take a look at yourself. That is a disgusting way of looking at the world. It's who we are as individuals who makes us who we are as people, and not where we're from, not what we look like, not what our abilities or disabilities are. Look at the person inside, and that's all I'm going to say. And the person inside of this McGowan character is ugly and evil. I honestly am the most disgusted I've ever been doing a video of this nature, and you know what? I want to do more cases like this. I want to bring to the forefront any case involving prejudice, involving this level of deplorable act, because it needs to be said. It needs to be brought to people's minds. We need to be better people. And if we do see something's going wrong somewhere, like these nurses, say something. Be a snitch, because you might well save a life. That's all I'm going to say for this video. But thank you very much for watching, and I appreciate this is going to be triggering for people. I really wish there would be more online or more availability to research, and if I've got anything wrong, again, like I said at the very beginning, correct me, add more to this, whichever you want to say. But thank you for watching, And any case suggestions, please let me know. I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe to me. It would help me out. It would also help you out if you want to see more from me. And I will see you later. Bye.